Hello and welcome back around the Bonfire. It is a joy to have you on this sunny Chicago day, match day +1, as Chicago Fire played to a draw with LAFC last night in the gorgeous, bounds of Mount Bridgeview, right? Sitting out there in the suburbs. Full house again today, joined by three of the best around. I've got Tim, Alan, and DJ with me here. Fellas, as always, around the horn. How are we feeling on this Sunday afternoon?
I don't know exactly how many mountains there are in the United States, but I think that we all know that Purple Mountain Majesty refers primarily to Mount Bridgeview at the golden hour, right when the sun is setting, and around the time that kickoff is happening.
To all my chronically online people, it reminds me of the TikTok sound, "Hello, New York," and then just the cows mooing. That's like that's what I hear whenever I enter SeatGeek and I see like the Rice-A-Roni factory, and it's
what I hate about the fact that you just said that. I saw that movie when I was a kid.
Yeah, we're all
New York, Miley Cyrus. No, you're in Tennessee. Get back on the damn cows.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know it was trending on TikTok for a while.
Rice-A-Roni, the official Bridgeview treat. They should have Rice-A-Roni mince pies or something like that on sale at SeatGeek Stadium.
You know what? I do want to give a shout out if we're talking SeatGeek, SeatGeek concourse ideas. They have El Taco Madre there, which all my Western suburbs homies know, it's the spot. Delicious food, incredible stuff. But I say all that to say, I never want to go to Bridgeview again, and yet I'll be there in 6 days. So that's how that works, I suppose. Chicago Fire, as we mentioned, drawing last night 2-2 against LAFC. We'll talk a little bit of news before we get into the game itself. Not too much to report, obviously, since we spoke last. No real news on the transfer front when it comes to Chicago Fire specifically. Still seems like we're nearing an end game with Andre Franco. No new reported signings coming in yet. And although it did sound like in the press conference this week, and Tim, I actually may ask you to expand on this slightly. It did sound like Greg almost kind of flirted a little bit more with the idea of staying with the 2-4-2 for the remainder of the season, taking that extra $1 million in GAM as opposed to targeting another designated player signing. Is that a fair? Is that a fair description?
I wanted an on the record sort of quote with him just about the trade off between going between the two, and that's basically what he said. That's sort of where my thinking is too. Now, he did sort of leave the possibility open of getting a loan for somebody. What I think is interesting is when you look at the construction of what he said for sticking 2-4-2. He talked about the fact that if you brought in a player from overseas, which would include Franco, he's here for 8 games by the time that you get a visa, unless you're able to get into whatever incredibly short line in the VIP section of immigration that Son Heung-Min was able to go through, which I don't think is open for most mortals, just to put that out there. But versus if you got a domestic player, then they can be here for, at this point, potentially 9 matches, right? Like the Fire could announce a move on Monday, the guy shows up on Monday or Tuesday, trains for a few days throughout the week and could be available on Saturday. So maybe that's a hint that there could be a domestic trade of some kind coming from somewhere in MLS or potentially elsewhere within the country. So something to keep an eye on. But I think that Franco is probably going to be the bigger move.
100% appreciate that. Yeah, not too much. The only other important thing noting, as of recording, New York Red Bull will be playing in a few hours. The Fire will remain in a playoff spot unless New York Red Bull win by 3 or more goals. So Fire currently ahead on wins, on points, and on goal differential. So they would need to overtake in all 3, or 2 of the 3.
And even then, the Fire would still have a game ahead.
Yes, it would still have a game in hand. Yeah, absolutely. That brings us to our next thing, which is the CONCACAF U15 championships. The U.S. lost to Mexico. I believe we ended 5-0. So a bit of as Tim decided to put in the outline, a shellacking. First there was thumpings, now there's shellackings. So I love the creative use of our
shellacking is
here, fellas.
Shellacking is by the way, worse than a thumping. Thumping would have been. It was a thumping at 3-0. A shellacking is
so how is a 7-0 loss a thumping, but a 5-0 loss is a shellacking? If that's the case, Tim,
it's the way that you take it.
I didn't like that explanation. You had goalkeeper Jason.
Yeah, it's because it was not a good one. It's because it was not a good explanation whatsoever. That's why.
Defender Finn McCraney, midfielders Christopher Morales and Robert Jardine, all on the roster there. 3 started, all except Finn McCraney. So Robert Jardine also captained the side.
Did you mention goalkeeper Nemo?
Yeah. Goalkeeper Jason Nemo started. Christopher Morales and Robert Jardine also started. Finn McCraney started on the bench, and Robert Jardine captained the side. They did advance past Panama on penalties on Saturday, but unfortunately losing to Mexico today. So an unfortunate result for the young guys, but a good run in the tournament there nonetheless. Exciting to see some young academy prospects and technically a first-team player in Robert Jardine getting some shine there with the national setup.
Ooh.
Yeah, and nobody got hurt, right? Which I think is a big thing. Like that's something that happened to Christopher Cups playing with the youth national team. I think he would have gotten a lot of minutes by now at center back, especially if he had stayed healthy while Teran was not healthy, and would have given Greg more to think about with who his starting center back was next to Jack Elliott. But because he had an injury while playing for, frankly, a lower level U.S. youth national team squad than we was getting with the Fire, we haven't had a chance to see him since. And so everyone's staying healthy and getting to continue their development with the Fire, I think is a win in that sense.
Absolutely. And hey, if nothing else, we did see Carlos Teran return back to the lineup. He's starting a second game. I played a full 90 last night. And also, as we begin talking a little bit about how the game went, Carlos Teran scored. Wonderful set piece, corner assist from Philip Zinkernagel there. I saw an insane stat last night, and to be honest with you, I should have fact-checked, but I will trust that you guys will fact-check me. Chicago Fire lead the league in goals converted from corners, which is, with 9.
Yep, that's accurate. It's number. A lot of, And it's coming after a year where the Fire could not buy a goal off a set piece. Like they could be playing like 11v1 and it feels like they somehow still wouldn't get past the first man on the corner.
Or when Shaqiri was taking the corner kicks, it would go all the way to the second post and then just...
a far post corner to Shaqiri meant the actual flag on the other side of the field. But no, I think for anybody who questions what direction this team is moving and they say, "Oh, there's been no changes, no movement," like you look at that stat, it's a purely a coaching stat. There's obviously, I think, a little bit of luck involved there, but purely a coaching statistic in my mind. But yeah, Carlos Teran opens the scoring on a nice set piece. Jonathan Bamba would add the second goal for the Fire after some wonderful buildup in the second half. The story of the day, unfortunately, was the Fire taking the lead and then surrendering it. Ryan Hollingshead scored on a corner as well. Actually, on a long throw, on a long throw that did look like it was potentially saved by Hugo Kuipers, but did not get reviewed by VAR, unfortunately. And then Denny Bouanga.
So they did take a look at it. And I asked Chris Brady about this after the game. What Chris said, I think, was interesting because he felt like it didn't go in, which, I mean, that's what he's going to tell us, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
But he said that he asked the line judge because he's like, that flag went up fast afterwards, right? Like, and it's a VAR at that point would be in the position of not having to decide that there was a goal, but having to have it being a clear and obvious error that it wasn't. And he told us, and again, like he's like, I don't know if this is true, but that the camera that they use that's kind of like by the net was not working on that end of the pitch. And so they didn't have the best angle available, which is part of why it was such a quick VAR review. And the referee did not go to his monitor. So if that's true, it's interesting. I watched it back slowly, as I'm sure a lot of us have. I, at first, from a bad angle, seeing it live, thought it was cleared off before the ball could have gotten in the back of the net. Watching it again, I just think that Kuipers was so far into the net that there's a decent chance it was a goal. I don't know definitively one way or the other.
We were going to talk about this, so let's talk about it, right? I think this was kind of just to recap our recap right before we move on here. Denny Bouanga did convert what was ultimately the equalizer on a penalty kick after Heung-Min Son, was fouled by Carlos Teran in the box on a 1v1 after a quick transition from LAFC. And again, right, we saw a huge night for the Fire, a huge night for MLS as Son makes his debut. Almost a packed house, darn near 20,000 people. We talked a bit before we recorded about how full the stadium was. A lot of kind of old Fire fans making the trip out to Bridgeview and a lot of new MLS watchers going out to Sports Sun. And you have yet again a kind of another game here where it feels like the referees are taking the lead role. And Tim, I think even if we want to give the referee the benefit of the doubt, which I think we should in terms of he's doing the best with what is available to him, it is a little concerning that the top flight professional league in, the wealthiest country in the world does not have not even necessarily goal line technologies, but cameras. Cameras in the goal. That feels like such an obvious answer to this. Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
No, that was the thing I was just about to ask. Is because I specifically remember a memory, an image comes to mind of the camera crews setting up like almost like GoPros, like cameras around the net. So when I remember seeing, I was, this is the top division, as mentioned, the top division of U.S. soccer. And I don't know if it's a SeatGeek thing or if it's just an MLS thing that there was no goal line technology ?
So MLS does not have goal line technology. And Don Garber has been asked about this every year for the past 5 or 6 years.
Oh my days.
At a minimum. And he basically has said that we don't have it and we're not getting it is like sort of like the party line at MLS.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say to that, Tim, right, just so people understand, goal line technology is not something you just like magically install in your goal, right? It's the same thing used in baseball, in tennis. They're also starting to debut in the NFL, which means all stadiums that are being used would need to be retrofitted with either TrackMan or Eagle Eye technology to actually. It's a system of cameras and sensors that tell you. It's very similar to how the offside cameras work, right? So you would need to retrofit every single stadium in MLS with that, which would cost a lot of money, which we know there are certain franchises in MLS that don't want to have to spend that. And that's all I'll say, just so we have a clear understanding of what it would actually take to do that. And Alan's point of like, your cameras aren't even functioning, that's second rate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing. Like we've all seen that sort of like T-Mobile, it's officially sponsored, whatever, like goal camera. That is something that the league has been paying for that, it seems like one of the cameras wasn't working. A lot of things were not working in SeatGeek. The Wi-Fi wasn't working in the press box. I had heard that there were plumbing issues in the time leading up to the match. I don't know if they were solved before they were in. I didn't encounter them myself. Like it's a stadium that has not had significant maintenance and lots of things just don't work there, which I think is a separate conversation. It's not unusual for things to not work in a certain place. I think not having goal line technology, it's expensive. It's not as expensive as VAR. It's on the similar level. And MLS got rid of using Opta as its official stats provider, which is used by most leagues in the world, like the Premier League, the entire EFL, like Serie A, Liga, like La Liga, like all of these places use Opta. MLS opted out of that, and they partnered with a German company that does like the Bundesliga and a few leagues here and there around the world, and that's it. One of the things that company offers is they say a more economical way of implementing goal line technology that uses a smaller number of cameras and some inference and stuff like that around that. The league has opted not to go with one of the things that like basically their partner could provide. Again, I don't know if that's better or worse. It seems to me like goal line technology is just like it should be part of the league. And if I also am one of those people that thinks that VAR can improve the game. But if you had to just pick one or the other because you can't afford to do both, it just seems like goal line technology is probably the one that you go for.
Interesting. See, I would honestly say the other way, because you can accomplish the same thing with VAR if done properly. Like, I'm sorry, you have a $2 billion streaming setup here. You have your entrance fee is $500 million, and you can't afford to build goalposts that have cameras inside them. Like it's a ridiculous question on its face.
Right? It's a question of choice, right? And I think that
yes, and that's my point, right? It's a ridiculous question on its face. You have the money, you have the ability, you have the technology. We've seen, and I understand they're not necessarily comparable in terms of size and revenue. You've seen the NFL, literally, they use they use those pylons with cameras at every first down now, specifically for that reason. This is such an easy answer, and the league not doing it is, I mean, I understand people's frustration with the league when they talk about not being at a level. It's not about the play; it's about the way the league is run.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
get rid of the chain gain, robot umpires.
I mean, legitimately, like Son came in on a $27 million ish deal, right? He makes his MLS debut in a stadium that doesn't have working cameras and where, some basic things like that are not a part of it. And I think that just goes to show the state of the league of it's champagne in some places and like old cans of like, natty ice in others.
Yeah.
SeatGeek is a can of lager that's just been left open in the Midwestern garage fridge for a few days. If we're making that reference.
It's the Miller Lite Vortex bottle that's been sitting in your dad's garage for 7 years. It's like, yeah, I do kind of want to open it, but I really shouldn't drink it. Like, this is bad, guys.
That's how like the pandemic that actually starts like a zombie apocalypse movie happens. Someone's going to open one of those cans somewhere, and the stuff that comes out is going to kill everyone and turn them into zombies.
Last of Us SeatGeek edition.
Well, we've all yelled about MLS enough. Let's start moving on. We'll talk about the game that was actually played. The Fire, we talked a bit about rust versus rest. Fire coming off a 2-week break. This was LAFC's 5th game in 15 days. And it did seem like there were benefits and drawbacks to both. I'll say that much. The Fire certainly came out rustier than expected. Bouanga and Son both started on the bench. And while the Fire did take an early lead, they were unable to convert on several other opportunities that they had to, I don't want to say put the game away because you never know what happens, but you certainly had an opportunity to be up 2 or 3 goals instead of 1 early in that game. It did seem like moments getting caught out in transition, and we'll talk a little bit individually, like player by player as guys come up. But Tim Allen, like general feelings on that game and how the Fire showed up early, especially.
Yeah, so early on, right? Like if you look at like the first like 10 minutes or so, like LAFC, who aren't a team that really likes to have the ball very much, it felt like nearly the entire ball. I think I looked at the stats as 76% possession in the first 10 minutes. That's way too much of the ball for a home game against the team where your game plan has to be, we would like to go ahead because this team is hard to play against when the score is level, and they're hard to play against when they're holding a lead. And they don't really know what to do when you have a lead on them, right? Like the game plan had to be get the first goal, and that's not the way that you come out and do that. Now, like the Fire had the first, I think, legitimate look on net, and the first legitimate, like obviously the corner that leads to the goal early on, but that corner came out of nowhere, right? Like if we're being honest, like I think Barroso did a good job to get the ball to Orahel a couple minutes before that, who couldn't really get a cross off, and like that could have been a chance in a different universe. But other than that, the only time that the Fire really had any kind of pressure in LA's end was when they won that corner, and Zinkernagel took it and became the header for Teran. And on one hand, like, sure, you're getting a goal like that quickly in the match, which is probably what like the way that the game plan was written, right? Like that's the ideal scenario. But just the way that the team came out before that, despite being so well rested, I think was disappointing.
It felt very fizzled out, honestly, especially near the end, like leaving a soda just out in the open for way too long, and it just loses all the fizz. I'm sorry, I'm making too many drink references.
Analogies,
but
I mean, what
thirsty, Alan.
Honestly, I'm gonna get a Coke after this. Coca-Cola, not the other thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that that was probably the most exhausting game for me personally. Like by the end of the game, I genuinely had to put my saxophone down because of how hot it was, just the amount of just intense. It was just intense, both on the field and off the field. It was great energy, but at the same time, I felt incredibly exhausted at the end. And I feel like the players kind of reflected that especially at the end as well.
It was hot. I feel like, I was a little surprised that there wasn't a hydration break because just it was so humid and sticky, especially early on. I guess it was probably just like under the threshold or who knows, maybe the thing that they used to measure the like heat index around
was broken.
SeatGeek was broken. Yeah. But I think that's kind of a good point is, like the early on is one thing. Late, especially, I think that after the Fire conceded the pin and the game is tied, it felt like LA was in control for virtually the rest of the match. Like the Fire had a couple looks on counters and quick moments, but it really was LA's game at that point. And I think a big part of that maybe is worth talking about if we just want to like talk about the bookends of this match. Berhalter went to his bench pretty early to get Jonathan Dean on, like about a minute after Son came on. like 60 seconds, 63rd minute. I don't have my notes right in front of me.
It was his son came on, and then they kept the stoppage going so Dean could come on.
Right. I think that like in my notes, I remember being like, oh, the clock ticked over by a couple of seconds, and now we're in a different minute. That's great. Makes it harder for me to write my notes. But after that, like the Fire made a triple sub in the 88th minute. There were 9 minutes of stoppage time, which is great. But like, it's still like, if you're now, like, they didn't have a guy like Denny Bouanga or let alone Son Heung-Min on the bench. So like, fine. But he's called his substitution solutions before, and he waited too long to try to go find the solutions when it was pretty clear some of the guys were tired.
Everyone
I think
was
it's
tired.
like we're beating around the bush a little bit, which is like, that was pathetic. I'm sorry. Like the opening of that game, we've talked a lot about the mentality of this team and how Greg has kind of handled that. That you should not come off 2 weeks of rest and look like that in the opening 30 minutes of a game when LAFC is not starting their best player, right? And that, I mean, I wouldn't even count Son, right? I think that's more of a kind of a throwaway in this game. He didn't really do much, if we're being candid. But you're not facing Denny Bouanga, right? And I know, Tim, you and I are probably going to disagree about this a little bit because you mentioned it before. Like Andrew Gutman getting absolutely picked on the entire night. I made a comment to somebody sitting next to me, like, Jonathan Dean shepherded a ball out in like the 80th minute. And I was like, I don't think Andrew Gutman successfully did that once today. Because I don't know if he didn't have the legs. I don't know if he didn't want to run, but he was getting beat to the ball all night on balls he should have just been shepherding right out very cleanly.
I think that it was one of his weakest performances. I'm not disagreeing about that. I don't think the problem was that he was getting bullied off the ball. I think the problem was, I don't know what it was. I don't know.
When I say bullied, I just mean getting picked on. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think that the issue was that he was too slow to the loose balls. I think a little tiny bit of its tactics, right, where I think he was getting caught out too much and wasn't getting back in time to do work defensively, and yet somehow wasn't really able to give the team enough going forward. But I think it was just a weak performance from him, and he came out. Now it doesn't sound like it was because of an injury related thing, but the entire match, I just remember thinking, is he fighting some nagging injury? And that's why it feels like he's playing this whole thing at 3/4 speed. And if he is, like that's right. And if he is, again, like Jonathan Dean is in there, I get it. I also get wanting to start Gutman if you think he's good to go, just because of what he's done for the Fire, especially this season. He's having a career year. He's been one of the most effective wingbacks in the league in a lot of ways. But I think pretty early on, it's like, look, especially at half, I think that if the message was, look, Andrew, like, we're not going to take you out now, but we need you to show more than you've shown us. And if you can't show us that, then we do need to take you out because we need more from a left back than what you've been able to give us so far. I don't know if that was the message at half or not, but it should have for sure been.
Yeah, and I don't mean to like sound like this was an entirely Andrew Gutman thing, because it was not. He's just kind of catching the brunt of the frustration because his was, I think, the most obvious. And I agree with you, Tim. Like, he should have started. Like he and Leonardo Barroso like should be starting. They're the two best fullbacks on this team, and offer you the most going forward. It does put you in a tough spot in terms of recovery, because Andrew Gutman, even when he's at his healthiest, is not great in terms of straight line speed or recovery or one-on-one against the ball, right? His strength defensively is more in breaking up play than it is about winning the ball back. That said, I think to the larger point there, it's like you look kind of similarly to the midfield and a Sergio Orihel. I mean, I don't know that he played poorly, but one of his, I think, worst games, I feel like, of the year, and more just from an ineffective standpoint. We talked a lot about Kellen Acosta over the course of this year being invisible. Sergio Orihel felt largely invisible on what was, and I'll say this just to kind of move along. Great night from Jay Davila. But disappointing performance in the midfield overall from Sergio, I felt like. And maybe you guys will disagree, but that
was actually the next point I was going to bring up. I do not remember Sergio Orihel being on that pitch. Davila, I will say, he did, in my personal opinion, all right. I know at the tailgate when they announced the lineup, a lot of fans next to me were very frustrated that he got the start ahead of Pineda. And like literally right before he got subbed off for Pineda, there was the Fire were making a break for goal. And then Davila accidentally plays it back to an LAFC player. A lot of people were frustrated, and then he got subbed out. So I think that just left a bit of a poor taste. But in general, the one thing that I want to say that it's like you mentioned, it's ups and downs, and it's not just ups and downs between like the three players in the midfield, but it's ups and downs between like forward, midfield, defense. It always feels like whenever one area sort of improves, another area sort of decreases. And
So
like,
I do think though, just to talk about Orhel a little bit more, like it's one of those things. The eye test I thought is pretty ineffective, right? Like he was doing some small stuff on the ball, like short passes that were not particularly impressive. We weren't really seeing him being used except in build up as like a piece that then tries to just draw someone in. And it wasn't working, by the way, which I think is maybe part of it. Like the whole system that Berhalter wants to use is to get his triangles in one part of the pitch so that he can have a switch when, you know, the other team commits numbers to that side. And LAFC were just not biting whatsoever. And so I think that may have been a little part of it. Now, statistically, like in terms of like the American soccer analysis goals added metric, which again, like, games not played on a spreadsheet, and I get that, but it's something I look at to sort of do like a verification of if what my eyes are seeing say something. Say that he had a average to above average performance for him, and that Jay's was actually a little bit weaker than average, although around what he'd been doing. I think by the game that I watched, I think that Davila was increasingly impressive. He was getting work done defensively. Didn't really have a lot going forward. I mean, he did a couple of quick passes here and there, but I don't think that's really the job that he's being asked to fill. So, you know, I get that at the same time that the reaction from fans that you talked about, Alan, which I think is a good point. His early performances were so atrocious that we didn't see why he was in the lineup. And I think that if it had been under the previous front office, people would have been like throwing in the towel on the guy. I think that with Greg, I at least was a little bit more, all the signings have been good so far. They saw something in this guy. Let's wait and see. And now I think we're seeing it. I think that he has proven that he is a capable defensive midfielder in this league. And I think that we're just starting to see what it is he can show.
Yeah, there's this one thing that I think a teacher once told me, that first impressions, it only takes a few seconds for someone to make a first impression of you. And in order to change that impression, it takes days, and if not even more. So, yeah, it's
especially difficult, right? Like
exactly,
we were talking about this in the press box a couple of days ago, and somebody said, "What is it going to take for fan perception of Jay Davila to change?" And I said, legitimately a goal. It doesn't really matter how good he is defensively and how much he's doing. That's what people see, and that's the thing that will make them change. Even though as a defensive midfielder, if you're scoring a goal, that's great, but that really isn't that much to do with what your primary job is, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that he's been taking care of the job. Like I think that we're seeing why he's in the starting lineup ahead of Mauricio Pineda at this moment. It'll be up and down, and I think the Pineda's going to get some starts, you know, down the stretch and all of that. But you can start to see why he was worth the money that the Fire spent bringing him in.
Yeah, 100%. I do think the last thing I'll say in regards to midfield, at least, like I think the Mauricio Pineda question now does become a little bit what is Sergio Orhel's role moving forward, right? Especially in a game like that. And Tim, you talked about like why no changes at half, which makes sense to an extent. You don't want to burn substitutions too early, but that was an incredibly physical game. And I've talked a lot about, I think, Sergio Orhel's ability on ball and how strong he is in possession, which he is, but he doesn't have, frankly, the physical stature yet, right? He's still young. He's 19, right? Am I making that up? But he doesn't have the physical stature or the strength of Mauricio Pineda. And it does, I think I put in there even as well, like, at what point do you consider moving back to more of a 4-2-3-1, getting Davila and Pineda together in the midfield, kind of, especially when your wingbacks are both going forward, right? You're losing something in transition by having both your wingbacks up or fullbacks up ahead and nobody in and having Davila coming back, but still, he's getting pretty involved.
I think that we did sort of see the game play like a 4-2-3-1 at times, with Brian Gutierrez being the sole guy forward. And by the way, I think that we should, I know you said you were done talking about the midfield. I think his performances we're talking about, especially because I think really is key to what the Fire would have needed from this game to have had a different result. But I think that it played like a 4-2-3-1 in some cases. You saw Sergio Orhel and Jay Davila staying back. At other times, it kind of played like the reverse, where Jay was trusted being kind of like the lone six, ahead of like, I don't really want to call Guti and Sergio like eights because it doesn't really fit, but like that's sort of what we saw from them a little bit. nominally, Brian Gutierrez started off on the left of that midfield trio. We saw him playing centrally a lot, and then Jay would sort of like shift, sort of like center shading left, I think. So I think that it's something that we saw. Let me just throw this out there. Brian Gutierrez, tactical yellow card, got an assist on the second goal. But shot off the post. What are your reads? Like, what if I asked you to rate his performance? What would you guys say?
I'd say he's probably about an 8, honestly. Even without like any goals or assists or anything, he's played as well as you would expect him to play.
Well, he had an MLS assist, right?
Yeah, secondary assist.
Yeah.
Hockey secondary.
I mean, it's kind of it's like a 7.5. Like he played well, but I think we've talked about a lot of like you need, I think in MLS especially, you do kind of need somebody special in the midfield. You need a creative player. You need a guy who can make those moves. And he and Zinkernagel had that beautiful exchange that led to the Bamba goal, and he had some really nice moments in front of that in the second half. I just don't know. I don't want to. He's 22 years old. You don't want to be like, oh gosh, is that there, right? But you do kind of have to ask yourself that question, right?
And
because
I think
at this point,
100%,
he's not the guy. I think is what
he's not taking over the game, right? And like this is another game he was good. I think he had a lot of good moments. Like in the lead up to that second goal, like sure, he just got the MLS assist and whatever. But he was that
key in that second goal.
Exactly. He had the pass that made it to Zinkernagel, that got to Bamba in the box. And like, that was a difficult pass to make. He was active in the buildup before that. Like he was basically holding the ball with LAFC's defenders, like buzzing around him and progressing the ball up the field in a way that's not hard to do. Like this is not an easy team to do that against. And I think that's impressive. And that shows you what he can do. But I don't really remember more than 2 or 3 examples of him doing that over the course of 90 minutes. And maybe look, if the ball had gone in and not off the post ahead of what led to LAFC's second goal, we're maybe having a completely different conversation. And I don't think that you want to radically rewrite a guy's performance because a ball ended up 6 inches one direction instead of the other, right? But at the same time...
Oh, sorry. I think sorry, Tim, not to interrupt you, but like one thing I'll add to that is like, candidly, I don't think it's any secret that we sit in the supporter section, or I do. Being right behind goal, that angle was much more difficult than it looked like. You had Hugo Lloris making himself as big as possible directly in front of Brian Gutierrez. That was not a howler of a miss, I'll say.
And arguably the goalkeeper that is best, like when he's having a moment, and I think that was a moment for Hugo Lloris, like the best goalkeeper that MLS has seen, possibly in its history, right? Not necessarily statistically and stuff like that, but if you look at his performance across the career, at his age, sure, they've fallen off a little bit, but he was on for that moment, and I think that he took away enough of the angle that Gucci really could have done much better.
Yeah. You can definitely see that was a goalkeeper that's played in a Champions League final. We were definitely giving him a lot.
What happened in that match?
What is up with? Okay. I'm gonna move past that, but
sorry, I had to pick on the Tottenham fan.
No, it's okay. We were giving him a hard time behind the goal. Anytime he had the ball in his hands or just near him, we were just booing and everything. At one point, there was a F the French chant going on.
Gosh.
So it was definitely a time when Hugo was near the Harlem end. So
DJ, by the way, I'm sure approves of that. Now, I'd like to point out that even though he plays for Côte d'Ivoire, Joe Bamba was born and raised in France and has a French passport. So
we're not going to worry about that.
To be fair, that's a difference. That's a whole other scenario you're talking about there. General rule of thumb, though, saying F the French is good.
Just to kind of close the loop, I think on Brian Gutierrez, Tim, I think that the interesting thing to me is, I think my view of him from the beginning of the season is that he's a much more complete player than he was, but he is. I think we are beginning
seeing
to
him defend. You've seen an example. There's now game tape of him defending.
Well, yeah, but even just in the way he contributes to the game, right? I think he's a much more complete, much more complimentary player than I thought he was. But I do think we are starting to close the book on Brian Gutierrez, the international European star, right? Which is not a bad thing. He can still go to Europe and be a very effective and good long-term player for a high-level club. I think he has those abilities. He's just not going to be. I'm trying to think. He's not. I was trying to think of somebody to say, and I had a funny thought. But he's not going to be for lack of a better word, a Cole Palmer, right? A guy who's going to be the guy at a huge club,
right? 100%. And I think this was going to be the chance that we'd have to do that, right? Because new system, we've seen just like the progress that guys like Sergio Orahel, right, who couldn't get on the pitch and frankly looked like MLS Next Pro was too easy. But I don't know that I would have said game in, game out starter on a team that was going to make the playoffs. And that's what he's become. So like having that structure around the team has helped a lot of guys, especially in the midfield, which is one of the places where you really do benefit from having a system that everyone understands and can work in. And we haven't seen Brian Gutierrez be able to take as many steps up and forward, even if he started at a higher level. Now, again, he was good in this game, but like he was not a game changer. And I just feel like, 25 matches into the MLS season, we've now had 25 matches. He didn't play in all of them because he was suspended for a couple, but in the matches he's played in, that many examples of him not single-handedly changing the outcome of a game. And you want a guy that's playing in that position, starting every match, to be able to do that a couple of times for you over the course of a season.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say, I think the possible outcome of Brian Gutierrez MLS lifer is starting to creep up in terms of probability. Not in a bad way. Again, not in a bad way. Like in a good way. Like he could be good at this level for a long time. Very good at this level for a long time.
Legitimately, I think that a move outside of MLS would be good for him. And obviously,
I agree.
It has strong connections to like family connections, to Jalisco. Everyone in his family grew up being Chivas fans. That is a team that is just begging for talent that has access to a Mexican passport, to the point that like Cade Cowell, who's about as Mexican as a Taco Bell, was eligible to play for them. So you know what? Like I can see that being a really good option for him. And I think that could really help in his development too. And like, I think that maybe could be the thing that helps him find that next level if he's got it in him, and then propels him maybe not to being starting in the Champions League final, but like a team that could make the Champions League in the Netherlands or something like that.
I don't mean to throw us off track. What's going on with Cade Cowell? I haven't heard. That is not a name I've heard in a long time. I remember when he was supposed to be massive.
He's playing for Chivas. Like he's getting regular minutes for them. I believe, did he make the All-Star roster this year? He did.
I don't think so. Oh, he did? Wow.
Didn't he?
7 goal.
Somebody remembers. DJ, do you remember this?
I do not, actually.
Okay. Well, you know what? That's my fault. This is not a Liga MX show. This is not a Cade Cowell show. So we'll
give me 1 second. I'll double check it. But like, he's playing like, and that just goes to show like there's guys that go to Liga MX and start really enhancing the performance in a league that has a lot more eyeballs on it than ours does. And we don't necessarily catch it just because like I don't have enough time to watch as much Liga MX as I used to or I'd like to. But it's still, I think, a challenge, and it would be a different kind of challenge, even if the level isn't really that different than what we're seeing from MLS these days. Like we've seen how close the leagues are in a lot of ways. It would be a new challenge for Brian Gutierrez. And I think that coming from his hometown, living in his, hometown boyhood club that he came up for, like, I just think a change in environment could be good for him. And yeah, Cade Cowell did not make the All-Star roster. I just completely imagined that. I must have seen him playing in Leagues Cup and got dates or something like that switched in my head. But, again,
I mean, the cautionary tale there, right, is like he is not a regular player for Chivas. He made 23 appearances, but only 13 starts, I should say, regular starter, 1,200 minutes across the 24-25 season. And that's kind of versus a Brian Gutierrez. I think Brian Gutierrez can go to most MLS teams and start.
And right. I think that Brian Gutierrez could go. I mean, I think that, even though they haven't performed at that level, Chivas is one of the teams that is the hardest to get on the roster for, just with their level and the expectations on that club. And, we saw Alex Zendejas, right? Like go from looking like she could be an MLS level starter pretty soon to being a regular starter at Club America, after 4 years at Chivas. So I think that just goes to show that things like that can happen, especially for someone that maybe needs the right kind of change in environment for it, right?
Yeah. I think there's a much interesting conversation that I think we'll have this winter should we need to, right? That'll be kind of an interesting one to think about. Phil, last thing I guess I'll point out here, the Fire's home woes continue, right? A point at home. Obviously, it's a very competitive side in LAFC. We saw them playing up to the occasion there. But again, it's another moment of a lot of eyes, a packed house, and the Fire fail to capitalize on all the attention. I guess, we don't need to spend a ton of time on this because we've talked it to death, but what does another 2 points dropped at home mean, especially at this point in the season, as you're in the home stretch in the playoff push?
I think the frustrating thing with this one, and I think that Greg Berhalter talked about this after the match, is just it's pretty clear that there were 3 points on offer, right? Like the Fire go up twice in the game, concede twice, and have to settle for a draw. You don't want to be doing that at home. They did not get outplayed by LAFC. And sure, like Bouanga started on the bench and all that, but like they did not get outplayed by LAFC. Even if LAFC had possession and stuff like that, the Fire easily could have won this game a number of different ways with slightly different things. And I think that that's the really frustrating thing. Last year, the Fire competing against the team of LAFC's stature, there could have been a loss that felt like a moral victory. It could have been a 2-1 loss, and it's like, oh, we played really well, we can take that into the next game, kind of quotes from the coach and everybody. This year, it felt like they were on level footing in some ways, obviously getting goals in the right times and moments to go ahead. And yet the end result was a single point. And I think that that's disappointing. And the Fire still have 5 of the remaining 9 games at home. And if they would like to stay in a postseason spot, they are going to need to get wins in several of them. I mean, at least 3, I think, would be the minimum, which would be doubling the number of wins that this team has at home this year.
It's, for me, a little bit shocking because, as mentioned, this was a perfect opportunity. Like we were talking about it last episode, how the Fire are rested. LAFC have played through a lot of games. Just so many things were looking like this is a possible win for the Fire. And I think my prediction was 2-0 for the Fire. Like I genuinely thought that they could, of course, score 2. They did, and maybe even keep a clean sheet. Now, the way they conceded those 2, it seems very Fire branded, Fire-esque, that it was a weird coincidence of no goal line technology, as well as the VAR for the penalty. But they fizzled out, essentially. A lot of people were they were saying that they did not push those last 9 minutes of extra time. They did not push, as Tim mentioned. After the second goal, the Fire just sort of, I don't want to say gave up, but as I've just been saying, fizzled out, essentially. And I think that's the most disappointing thing, is that they just sort of fizzled out and let LAFC take over the spotlight. They let LAFC fans have the fun. They let the Son and Spurs fans have the fun, where by the end of the game, it just felt like this was a situation of where the Fire were sort of on the away team again. And a lot of people were there just either for a player or for the other team.
I did feel like it felt like a Fire home crowd, if I'm being honest. I will push back. You can say it. It's like,
I do agree with that.
So like something that
my point of view, all right.
Paul Tenorio said in the in his recap of the match, because he was there. I think this was his second Fire game in person this year, and he was there to cover the Sun angle, obviously, as like a national reporter for the Athletic. That when the penalty went, the penalty came, and Bouanga was standing behind the spot, that boos were raining down because fans were disappointed that it wasn't Sun taking it. And I'm like, I do not think that is why there were a lot of boos from the crowd at that moment, right? Like there were boos that a penalty had been awarded against the Fire, because it was a crowd that was largely pro-Fire, while obviously having a notable contingent of people that were not really so pro-LAFC as they were wanting to see Sun.
Yeah, first of all, this is from a supporter's perspective. LAFC fans are not the nicest fans that I've met in terms of them coming, of away fans coming here. It got to the point where after the game, as I was heading towards the West lot, I spotted some of their away supporters doing things that they shouldn't have. And I had to discuss with the supporter liaison, and they're like, yeah, they're in trouble. So, and two of them even wanted to come up to me and start a fight after they noticed that I saw them doing something they weren't supposed to. So,
and there's plenty of footage of LAFC fans at away matches, primarily getting into situations like that. And I think that's one of the downsides. Like, people talk about how big and positive the community is around the LAFC supporters culture and stuff like that. I think that the downside is we're seeing stuff like that happen far too often from a group of people that didn't have a team to support until 2018.
Yeah, there were no other teams in LA. That's true.
Well, I mean, they did not support this team, right? Like, their support, their love of LAFC is at most 7 years old, right?
Yeah. I do always find it funny that they seem to exclusively fight each other. Always gets me. I think the one thing I'll add, and then we'll kind of wrap here, guys. We talk a lot about this LAFC side, and maybe they're not who they were, but they're still one of the most competitive teams in MLS. You do still expect them to push for a playoff spot and frankly for a cup contention, especially with Son being added. If the Fire had won that game, and were in the Western Conference, they would have been ahead of LAFC. That is, and
LAFC would have still had 3 games in hand, right? Like, LAFC have missed a ton of games because the Club World Cup. So there's putting their perspective there.
Yeah, putting additional perspective, they would have also been above Seattle Sounders with 1 game in hand, but still, let's kind of recontextualize where Chicago Fire sit in the grand scheme of things. And Tim, this is to your point, right? Of last year a loss, you could have had a moral victory. This is a club you're largely on equal footing with. You look at some of the, this is kind of an outlier. You're in the West because you have some down teams, and you have kind of the traditional powers starting to fall out of favor a touch with Seattle and LA and Portland kind of falling a bit. This is not some woe-begotten team. This is a really, really strong Eastern Conference, and the Fire are moving down it. So just worth pointing out that in the large scheme of the MLS table, this is a game you should win, right? Or you should, at home, you should win. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that the Fire have had a lot of other games that they should be winning at home, and that hasn't been the case. The next game is at home. That's coming up on Saturday. I think that's going to be a really key test for the team, and that's going to be the can they take care of business match more than anything else. And if they do that, I know I said 3 wins at home. I still think that that's probably what they need. There's some very winnable games going ahead, but they need to do that more than they need to get wins against teams like LAFC, right? The story of this team has been they've struggled against some top teams, but they've also gotten results against top teams, like a draw against Inter Miami, now a draw against LAFC, win against the Vancouver Whitecaps when they were on top of the league. They've been able to do that. It's seeing them do that and also take care of the teams below them in the table, at home especially. And we really need to start seeing that from this team. Is running out of time to do it now. In a way, you're almost I don't know, maybe they could get by with some away wins and sneaking some points here and there. And then it kind of doesn't matter because you won't have, home field advantage in the postseason. And I wouldn't want to host the Chicago Fire in the playoffs with the way that they played on the road. But it's still just disappointing that it feels like as much improvement as there's been, there could be so much more.
Exactly. And sort of not only that there could be more improvement, but the fact that when one area improves, another sort of falters. I know I keep beating a dead horse of Rafa Wiki and those seasons where we didn't win, or we barely got any points on the road. Now we're winning on the road, but somehow we forgot how to win at home. It's this sort of seesaw. We can't find that equilibrium.
100%. Well, and aren't we all just searching for equilibrium? But that's where we'll wrap up today. Appreciate you as always joining us here around the bonfire. As always, stay tuned to meninred97.com. That's where you'll find the articles and all the updates from Tim, from Alex, from Max. That's where you'll find the illustrious roster tracker that will explain everything you need to know about MLS roster construction, which is very confusing and, if we're being honest, very stupid.
Courtesy of
the rules are stupid, not the tracker. The tracker is great. Let's be clear about that. But yeah, you'll find all your news and updates there as the Fire look to strengthen the squad ahead of the end of the summer transfer window here. And as the Fire make a playoff push, that's where you'll stay updated with all the commentary, details, and information from the squad.
And so just one thing to note, this is obviously a crucial week with a week and most of a second week left in the transfer window. I would keep an eye on socials, minutered97.com, especially this week, because I would expect that there should be updates.
And one thing I want to add is I want to thank the people that have been coming to us at the games and saying, hey, we listen to the pod. We love what you guys are doing. It really, it helps and it encourages us to do more and even better. So don't be afraid. If you see a guy with a saxophone, that's me. And I'm very much encouraged to come out and say hello, because it's always great to hear that people are encouraging, that people are listening to us. So we love you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I second both points. Stay attentive on socials at Men in Red 97 everywhere that you consume content on social media, except Facebook. And thank you so much. The only reason we do this is because people listen, and I guess sometimes those people are us too. We like to talk about ourselves. But anywho, thank you so much again for joining us around the bonfire. It has been an absolute pleasure. For Tim, for Alan, for TJ, for Austin, thanks for being here. And come on, you Men in Red.